Okay, chapter 25, World War II. Again, liberal democracy appeared to have triumphed after World War I, but the triumph was short-lived because throughout the 20s and 30s, democracies crumbled. The totalitarian state. The totalitarian state was something that had been impossible before, was new in world history. The totalitarian state was made possible with the invention of the telephone, the telegraph, the radio, the automobile, the truck, the airplane, the diesel engine. Without that, there could have been no totalitarian state. Before this time, all your rulers had to govern through their nobles. When Lenin took over, he put 5 telephones on his desk. He said to the people on the other end of the phone, so always keep a man on the other end of the phone 24/7, because when I pick up, I want someone to answer right away. So he had persons on both ends so that he could talk to someone, and that someone could wake up the person Lenin really wanted to talk to. He would say, keep a man on that phone 24/7 all the time, because I might call in the middle of the night, I might call any time. But basically, again, without the telephone, he could not have governed the way he did. Same thing, that totalitarian state, it depended on modern technology, and folk, keep in mind, they did not have the computer, and they did not have the internet. With today's mainframe computers and today's internet, I believe they could control things a whole lot more, and folk, for the most part, I know, most of you, for money, you're using this, and I am too. This could give a future totalitarian state so much authority it could put it to shame. They can tell you what you can buy and what you can't. And they'd have to approve they would approve if you wanted to go buy a desktop, a laptop computer, you go to the store, your computer purchase have to be approved by central authority, by a robot, who would decide whether you have enough money in your account to afford that, or if you're going to pay it on credit, whether you have the credit. Just like when you buy an automobile today, they can say, well, your credit is not good enough to buy this car, you can't buy it. And there's some merit to that, folk. It really is. But also it's known car companies will find a way to sell you a car when the dealer knows you can't afford to buy it. All right, I see a person back there who agrees with that. Yes, and I agree. I know it to be true. They'll find a way to sell you a car if you want to buy one when they know they shouldn't. The salesmen get a commission for every car they sell. All right, anyway, the totalitarian state was something new. Russia, Germany, Italy, and Spain developed a degree of totalitarianism that had never been seen before. One man and one party was in charge. In Germany, Germany it was the Nazi. In Italy, it was a fascist party. And the word fascist now has gotten a bad name. So on. One man, one party. Leader in Germany, one man, Hitler. Leader in Italy, Mussolini. Leader in Spain, Franco. I'm going to write that down. I actually can't think of the name of Spain's party. Maybe they allowed more than one. And of course, in Russia, it was one party, the Communist Party. The leader at this time was Stalin. Germany and Japan had these militaristic, feudal tendencies. And both wanted to copy the other nations in building colonial empires. That put Germany and Japan in the same camp. Now, we'll start off with fascism in Italy. When World War I ended, Mussolini stepped forward and he took over Italy Again, the details, I mean, you can read the details for yourself, but basically, my long story short is, Mussolini took over, he outlawed all dissent, he said the state is never wrong. No matter what the state does, it's always right. He began to prepare Italy for war, he was a man of war, but here's where he went wrong. He told Hitler, Mr. Hitler, I won't be ready to fight until 1942 at the latest. Hitler said, we're going to fight now. So Hitler started a war in 1939 and caught Mussolini unprepared. But anyway, Mussolini began to convert Italy into one big military camp where the church and state, he forbade criticism of the king, criticism of the church. Now keep in mind, Mussolini was not the king. He was the dictator who took over. The king was a mere figurehead. Then he sent the women in the workforce home, saying that the place for women is the home. Women are there to bear children. And if the women were replaced by men, the men who could not find work, he drafted into the army, they were ending the unemployment problem in Italy. However, in spite of all this, Mussolini was never able to get the total control that Hitler and Stalin had. I want to call it the USSR. Partly because, with all due respect, Mussolini was not as evil, as wicked, as was Hitler and Stalin. Stalin, under him, millions of people died of starvation. Under Hitler, multiplied millions died in the war. Mussolini just didn't have the control, partly because of, I think, the presence of the Catholic Church in Italy, and the Pope somewhat kept him in check. Hitler did not have to contend with the Pope being in his midst, neither did Stalin. Mussolini did. Mussolini got the church on his side temporarily, but here's how your book sums it up. Fascism promised a lot, delivered little. Promised much, big promises, little delivery. All right, now we come to the big one, Germany.
Did we figure out what Spain was?
What's that?
Did we figure out what Spain was? Like,
Well, okay, so let's tell you this about Spain. I met a Spanish man in college. He would talk extensively about Franco. Spain did not join in World War II, so that's why I'm not really as interested in that. I mean, okay, Spain, Spain had a civil war, and Hitler and Mussolini sent an army to fight with the dictatorial side with Franco, and France and Britain would not help the democracies, neither did the United States. So guess what? Without that foreign presence, namely Germany and Italy, Franco won. But then when the war came, Franco said to Hitler, Spain cannot fight a modern war, which was very, very true. Oh, Hitler threw a fit, Hitler shouted, Franco stood his ground. No, Mr. Hitler, Spain cannot help you, Spain cannot fight a modern war, and Spain wouldn't fight. And Franco lived longer than Franco finally died in 1976 of old age, unlike Hitler and Mussolini, who didn't live near that long. But anyway.
they didn't have a particular party or anything?
I don't know if there was a particular party involved, but his name was Franco, the dictator Franco, and he ruled Spain for a long time. He never made Spain rich. Today Spain is poor. Here was the thing about me, and the folk, I keep harping on this. Any country that embraces socialism is bound to be poor. Any country that embraces communism is bound to be even poorer. The people depend on their government and think we're entitled, the government's going to get us out of this poverty. No, it won't. It can't. You have to get yourself out of poverty if you find yourself in it. And folk, I'll tell you, more than once, I'm 70, I found this is my obligations and this is my income. What do? Try to reduce your obligations and get more income. This is probably going to happen to every one of you at one time or another in your lifetime. Hey, don't panic. It's not anything out of normal. I mean, Donald Trump once found his net worth to be zero. He owed as much as he had. This happened in 1983. Donald Trump, net worth. His debts equaled his assets. And it's likely going to happen to you and me. It's not that you're bad. It's not. Every one of us makes some unwise moves from time to time. Sometimes it's forced on us. Medical emergencies, illnesses, things like this that sometimes we can't help. Anyway, Hitler, I mentioned a lot about him. Hitler was, during the prosperous times, Hitler could not do much. But when the Depression struck, somebody said Hitler was like a fly. He only lived off garbage. When everything is clean, I mean, you keep things clean, and guess where the flies and gnats go? They leave you alone. They get away. I mean, keep it clean and they go out. Well, when things get dirty, in come the flies and the gnats, plus the roaches and all the other stuff. Don't give them anything to eat. Now that's easier said than done. I mean, that's easier said than done. But anyway, the Nazis, most of the Nazis were young. And today, a lot of your Nazis are young people. When the Depression struck, Hitler's party gained power. Hitler was able to persuade Hindenburg, who was probably suffering from Alzheimer's, to make him, Hitler, the chancellor, or make him Hitler prime minister. Actually, Hitler became prime minister, and once as prime minister, Hitler took over, and he controlled the churches. He had asked the Congress to give him broad powers, and he made a totalitarian state in a short time. He set up a bunch of secret police. Trade unions were dissolved, no unions anymore. Banks were controlled. Churches were regulated. Many dissenters were put in concentration camps, and everybody was afraid to speak up. There's a story that went around. Now, okay, the man who told this was never able to tell exactly the sequence. But here's the way his speech, he made a speech. And nobody knows his sequence, but so we have to invent a sequence. But the first part of the line is this. His speech is, first they came after the Jews. I was not a Jew, I did not protest. Next they came after the communists. I was not a communist, I did not protest. Next they came after the gypsies. Well, I was not a gypsy, I did not protest. Then they came after the Masons. Well, I was not a Mason, I did not protest. Next they came after me, and there was nobody around to protest. The last line is real. I mean, the first line, first to come the Jews, that's real. The last line is real. The middle lines, we don't know what sequence, and even he could not remember the sequence, and nobody recorded the speech. But if you want to look it up, it's first that came after the Jews. Just look that up, and you'll find the speech. Anyway, the SS. So yeah, Hitler's secret police was the SS, were set up to use terror to enforce Hitler's policies. Oh yeah, the man's name was Pastor Martin Niemöller, Neimoeller. I'm not going to write his name down. But he talked about how that nobody protested when it came for him. Pastor Martin Niemöller was a Catholic bishop, I believe, or priest. And of course, being a Catholic, he could not join the Masons. But he said, like the rest, I did not protest when it came after them. When it came after me, nobody protested. Jews were encouraged to leave Germany. There was no place for them to go. Now, one country that did take the Jews in, the Dominican Republic, took as many as they could, but keep in mind the Dominican Republic is small. One famous Jew who left and went to the United States was Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein at some point stopped believing in pacifism when he saw how the Jews were put into hot ovens and burned alive. It sounds gross, folk, but this actually happened. But I mean, that made a lot of Jews stop believing in pacifism. Yes?
So the Jews were encouraged to leave Germany, and you said they went where?
Some of them, there was hardly any place for them to go.
Yeah.
The United States would not take them. They took Einstein because he was famous. Now, They went to Dominican Republic.
Gotcha.
Dominican Republic, a lot of them. Now, I worked with a man at Lockheed named Herbert, and he said, I was one of 7 children. My mother got rid of me like we got rid of, like a cat gets rid of a kid. She got rid of us one at a time, but she was sent to a concentration camp and died. But she got rid of us because, in his case, one of his relatives had moved to Alabama in the 1850s. So because 100 years later, 1940s, 90 years later, he had relatives, the government, the United States let him and his brothers and sisters in. So beginning with the oldest, the mother sent the oldest one. His mother could only send them one at a time. So his mother sent the oldest one. Eventually, my friend Herb got to go to Germany. Got to leave Germany, but one at a time. Then the mother was put into a concentration camp, and Herb never heard from her again. Presumably, she died in the camp. I asked him, where was your father? Well, he was already deceased. So Herb was able to get out because he had relatives here, but for the most part, the United States denied the Jews in Germany the right to leave. The result was 6 million Jews in Europe were killed in Hitler's Holocaust. Hitler wanted to create a Europe where the Aryans would be dominant. He not only opposed the Jews, he also looked down on the Slavic people as being inferior. And ironically, the Slavic people, we know, are the Russians and Eastern Europeans. It was the Slavic people who helped to defeat him. Hitler planned the word Slav, Slav, if it looks like the word slave, in Roman times, the Romans would capture these people, and that's where the word slave comes from. The Romans would capture these people and make them slaves. And these Slavic people tended to not have a government, and this enabled them to become slaves. They tended to be stateless, somewhat like the North American Indians. Anyway, uncivilized, basically. And the thing about uncivilized people, they much too often tend to become slaves. Now, folk, I've already mentioned how the Hitler had to sit in a stance and watch while a black runner outran all his white runners. The black runner's name, as I've already mentioned, was Jesse Owen. I'm not going to write that name, but Hitler had to sit in a stand. The 1936 Olympics were held in Germany. Now, the tradition, we still have the Olympic tradition of carrying the Olympic torch to Athens, Greece, was started by, does anybody know who? Who started this tradition of carrying the Olympic torch to Athens?
Abraham Lincoln.
Adolf Hitler. You're close. Adolf Hitler. Now, the 5
That's my quote of
rings.
the day right there. Quote of the day right
I might not be drawing on. These 5 rings you see as the Olympic symbol, again, started by
there. Professor,
Adolf Hitler.
it's three circle on top, 2 circle on either bottom.
3 circles on the top and 2 on the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. Thank you. Started by Adolf Hitler. I'll stand corrected. Yeah. Again, so some of what Adolf Hitler does lives on. Now, there's something else that Adolf Hitler started that still lives on, and I have owned 3 of them. The Volkswagen, or in Germany, the Volkswagen. Adolf Hitler designed it in 1949. 2 of them were sold in the United States. Today, the city of Chattanooga, just a 2-hour drive north of here, has one of the world's largest Volkswagen plants. The Volkswagen, the reason I quit buying them was they did not change their cars, and they were still, by the 1949 standards, they were good cars, but by 1980 standards, they fell behind. They were noisy. Their heat was too much heat in part of the car and too little in another. A lot of heat would gush out through small vents, and that would make you could burn your ankles on a heater because they had a whole lot of hot air was coming out the vents that was too hot. They were difficult. They did not have a good climate control. Anyway, it seemed to me like other cars were better. Now, that might not be true today. My son rented a Volkswagen one time. and he didn't like it, but I forget now what his reasoning was. All right. Now, once in power, Hitler broke the Treaty of Versailles by arming Germany. The Treaty of Versailles said Germany should not be armed. Hitler began to arm Germany, and the rest of the nations of the world did absolutely nothing. Hitler admitted if the rest of the world had come down on him and dealt with him with a firm hand, he did not have the means at first, but we waited, and we almost waited too late. Hitler built up Germany's air force called the Luftwaffe. Hitler's first move was to occupy the Rhineland. In 1936, Hitler occupied the, no, I'm not going to write it down. The point I want to make, though, is Hitler started off taking one bit of territory, and the rest of the world did nothing. Let him have it. So he took the Rhineland, and the rest of the world did nothing. Then Mussolini joined with him. He picked up another ally in Franco, the dictator of Spain, even though I've already mentioned Franco refused to fight with him. Hitler turned his sights toward the east, where he said that Germany would pick up the land. Former German rulers had tried to get land from the south and the west, but Hitler said, no, we really want the eastern land, the land from the Slavs, because the Slavs are weaker, or so Hitler thought. Now, Adolf Hitler had been born in Austria, even though his ancestry is disputed. Now, some of you might have heard, someone might have heard this. There is a rumor going around that has been going around since the war ended, that Adolf Hitler's ancestry was Jewish. Unfortunately, this cannot be actually proven. We don't have a lock of Hitler's hair. We don't have any of his DNA. His body has never turned up. We can't prove it by any means, but we don't know who his paternal grandfather was. But we do know that his maternal grandmother, his paternal grandmother, worked for a Jewish man who might have been the father of Hitler's father. But this cannot be proven. But nevertheless, Hitler claimed that he was German, even though he was born in Austria. And he claimed that fellow Germans in Austria were being oppressed. So he said, I want to free oppressed fellow Germans. So he moved into Austria, which by this time was just a small country. Austria was powerless to resist. All right. By any chance, have any of you ever watched a play or the musical, The Sound of Music? Mm-hmm. It's based on a true story that happened at this time, even though, if you actually research it, a lot of the details are not accurate. But the true story is an Austrian nobleman and his family did escape. The Austrian nobleman had been a war hero in World War I, and Hitler wanted to draft him into his army. Instead, they escaped through Switzerland and escaped into Canada, and their descendants are still there. They never went back to Austria. This is based on a true story, even though a lot of the details are not quite so, not quite true. But the story is basically true. This happened when Hitler took over Austria. So he took over Austria, and the rest of the world did nothing. Hitler became convinced that, hey, I can do anything I want to, and nobody is going to stand up to me. So Hitler grabbed half of Czechoslovakia in 1938. Then in 1939, he grabbed up the other half. And a lot of Czechs will resent the West to this day because nobody moved in to stop Hitler. At this point, here comes one of the most brilliant men, and yet he was the biggest fool, Neville Chamberlain. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Neville Chamberlain wrote a letter to Mr. Hitler and said, Mr. Hitler, I'd like to meet with you. Hitler could have, suggested a meeting to shorten the trip. Instead, Hitler made Chamberlain come all the way to him. So the President of France and Chamberlain and Hitler and Mussolini sat around a table, and there at the conference table, Chamberlain and the President of France gave Adolf Hitler everything Hitler wanted. And all that they received from Hitler was a promise from Hitler that I will not seek any more territory. I've got I've got Austria, I've got Czechoslovakia, I've got the Rhineland, I've got the student land, I've got it all I want. And Neville Chamberlain got off the airplane waving a piece of paper, and he said, "We are committed to peace in our time, and with this, we're going to have peace in our time." I spoke with Mr. Hitler this morning, and I can assure you, we are both committed to world peace. And Neville Chamberlain goes down in history as one of the biggest fools who ever governed a major country. It's called appeasement, folk. Give the man everything he wants and he'll behave. It's called appeasement. 2 days after Chamberlain arrived in London, Hitler invaded Poland. It's like the British and French had said, I'm going to pantomime a bit. If you do that again, I'll declare war. Now listen, I'm not going to keep backing up. You keep doing that, I'm going to declare war. Now, I mean it. Next time you do it, next time I will declare war. Well, finally, when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, Great Britain and France did declare war. Sad to say, though, neither of them sent an army to Poland, but they did mobilize for war. They did declare war, and Hitler mopped up Poland in what was called a blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare. Essentially, the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, would come in and drop the bombs, and then the tanks, the panzers, would come in, and then finally the troops, the Wehrmacht, war machine, or Wehrmacht, would finish up, mop up what the tanks had left over. And they made short work of Poland. Is it true that Poland used horses, mounted horsemen, to fight the German tanks? Unfortunately, it is true, even though if you read the detailed account of why, it's not quite as bad as it sounds.
Horses versus tanks?
Yes, but the purpose was for diversion, more so than actually to fight the tanks, yeah. But nevertheless, it is true. But yeah, anyway, yeah.
And it is also true when Italy fight with Greek. Italy got tanks, and Greek also used horse to fight them. However, the horse, the cavalry, they can use like anti-tank grenades, something like those to hurt tank.
Yeah, well,
somehow it is true.
yeah, it is. Yeah, but it's not as bad as it might sound. I mean, I read an account recently, and it said yes, the Polish people did use the horse, but it was more to try to divert the tanks away from the main, not to actually fight against the tanks. But it was still ineffective. Now, I want to say this while I'm on the subject of Poland. I've not heard one in more than 35 years, but there used to be, a lot of people tell a lot of jokes about the Polish people. I'm not going to repeat one here, no. But I want to say, on a personal note, the Polish people I have known have been some of the smartest people I've ever met. But collectively, down through their history, they have done some things that made them appear really ignorant. Now, one time a Polish man asked an American, is it true the Americans make jokes about us? And the American, him for a while, then finally thought he had to others, said, yes, it's true. The Polish man said, we're sorry to hear about that because the Russians do too. I want to tell you a story. Some Lockheed engineers. This was a team of engineers I was working with. Someone bought a flashlight and it didn't work. So the engineers, being what they were, said, well, okay, let's check the voltage. So they checked the voltage on the battery. They got 6 volts. So then they checked the continuity from the battery to the switch. And they said, well, voltage is getting to the switch. They turned on the switch. Well, voltage is getting past the switch. Then they determined voltage is getting to the light socket. Then they finally determined no, voltage is not getting past the light socket, so the problem must be a burned out bulb. The point of making all that work when any half-wit would have just simply checked the bulb first thing and replaced the bulb, but they had to go through all this rigmarole to determine this flashlight has a burned out bulb. Now, I have a bulb in my house that doesn't work either, but believe me, I'm not going to get out my voltmeter and I'm going to replace the bulb first thing, and if that doesn't work, then I'll get more serious about it. But anyway, it is the idea that you sometimes call on people who are too smart to do a really, really simple job. And they'll make dunces of themselves. The Polish people were smart. But they were not a match for Hitler and this lightning warfare. And the Polish people then turned against the Jews who had fought with them. and a lot of the concentration camps were found in Poland. Anyway, Chamberlain was replaced by Winston Churchill. Churchill had looked like a dunce himself because he had opposed the treaty with Hitler. He tried to tell the English people, hey, Hitler is evil, you can't make a treaty with him. And everybody laughed at him. Today he's looked on as being a hero because he was right. But anyway, Churchill became the prime minister.